Every government claims it serves its people. Every revolution promises justice. Every strong man insists history will vindicate him. But sometimes, it isn't a foreign army or a political rival that delivers the final judgment. Sometimes, it's the economy. Venezuela did not collapse overnight. It collapsed slowly, quietly, systematically, until money itself became meaningless, until oil, the country's greatest blessing, turned into a curse, until a president found himself ruling a nation that could no longer function. This is the story of how Venezuela's economy reached the point of no return, how it became the ultimate indictment of Nicolás Maduro, and how the world ultimately delivered its verdict. To understand Venezuela today, you must forget the headlines. Forget slogans. Forget politics for a moment. Forget personalities. Because long before Nicolás Maduro became a symbol of corruption, repression, and economic collapse, Venezuela was already walking toward disaster. This is not a story about left versus right, not about socialism versus capitalism, not about propaganda. This is a story about incentives, institutions, power, and what happens when a country builds its entire economic identity around a single resource and then destroys the system that was supposed to manage it. It's a story about how an economy can deliver a verdict, even when courts cannot. There was a time when Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America. In the 1950s, Venezuelans enjoyed a standard of living higher than much of Europe. Caracas was modern, cosmopolitan, confident. Immigrants didn't flee Venezuela, they moved to Venezuela. Why? Oil. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, even larger than Saudi Arabia's. For decades, oil money funded highways, schools, hospitals, subsidies, and imports. But oil also created a dangerous illusion. The illusion that productivity didn't matter, that institutions didn't matter, that diversification didn't matter. Why build factories when you can import everything? Why tax citizens when oil pays the bills? Why reform when money keeps flowing? This was Venezuela's original sin. Economists have a name for what happened next: the resource curse. When governments earn revenue from natural resources instead of taxes, accountability breaks down. Citizens stop demanding efficiency. Governments stop caring about productivity. Politics becomes a fight over distribution, not creation. In 1998, Venezuela elected Hugo Chavez as president. Chavez wasn't supposed to be president. He was a former military officer who had led a failed coup attempt in 1992. But Venezuela was angry. Corruption scandals, economic inequality, and a sense that the elite had abandoned ordinary citizens created fertile ground for a radical leader. Chavez promised change: smash the old system, nationalize key industries, redistribute wealth, put oil revenue back in the hands of the people. At first, Chavez's policies worked. Oil prices surged during the early 2000s, flooding government coffers with revenue. Social programs expanded, poverty fell, and the country appeared to be on the path to inclusion and reform. But underneath the surface, cracks were forming. Venezuela relied on oil for more than 90% of its export income. During a global oil boom, this worked. But the economy became vulnerable to external shocks. Chavez used oil money to buy loyalty and silence opposition, subsidizing food, fuel, and housing, increasing social spending without fiscal discipline, expropriating private businesses. By doing this, he created a system entirely dependent on high oil prices. When prices dropped, the system could no longer sustain itself. The economy was no longer about production or innovation. It became about distribution, distributing money, favors, and political power. Chavez treated markets as enemies. Private companies were expropriated. Price controls were enforced. Currency controls restricted access to dollars. The central bank lost independence. The effects were predictable. Domestic production collapsed. Imports skyrocketed. Black markets thrived. Corruption became systemic. Instead of reforming the economy, Chavez blamed economic sabotage by the private sector and foreign powers. Oil masked these failures for years, but Chavez did not build institutions. He built loyalty, and loyalty does not survive economic reality. By 2012, Chavez's health began to fail. The system he built relied entirely on his charisma, authority, and the illusion of prosperity. When Chavez died in 2013, Venezuela inherited a fragile economy, empty institutions, and growing debt. And into this vacuum stepped Nicolás Maduro, Chavez's handpicked successor. Nicolás Maduro was not an economist. He was a former bus driver, union organizer, and loyalist. He inherited a fragile economy dependent on oil, a political system structured around loyalty, not competence, empty institutions incapable of enforcing checks and balances. Maduro's first challenge was already looming. Oil prices were falling. Venezuelan oil exports, which had once funded everything, could no longer cover rising social spending and debt. Maduro attempted to sustain Chavez's policies, expanding social spending, printing money to cover deficits, enforcing strict price controls. The result? Hyperinflation. Prices doubled, then quadrupled, then spiraled into millions of percent annually. Savings were wiped out. Wages became meaningless. People carried stacks of banknotes to buy basic food. The currency lost all credibility. As the economy collapsed, over 7 million Venezuelans fled the country. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Schools closed or operated with minimal resources. Crime soared. The collapse was not gradual. It was catastrophic, touching every part of life. Yet Maduro survived. How? Maduro consolidated power through rewarding the military with businesses and privileges, politicizing courts, jailing or exiling opposition leaders, manipulating elections. Oil revenues were down, so the state turned to gold mining, smuggling, and international sanctions evasion. Eventually, accusations of involvement in drug trafficking networks emerged. In 2020, the U.S. unsealed a superseding indictment against Nicolás Maduro. Narcoterrorism, cocaine trafficking, money laundering. A multi-million-dollar bounty was announced for his capture. Sanctions were expanded. Assets were frozen. Diplomatic recognition shifted to opposition figures. Even after years of economic collapse, Maduro maintained power because Venezuela had destroyed its institutions. No independent judiciary, no neutral electoral system, a military loyal to the regime. By the time the economy imploded, there was no mechanism left to remove him. The world had delivered its verdict, but it was symbolic until January 2026. On January 3, 2026, U.S. forces launched a carefully planned operation in Caracas. Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were captured without mass casualties. They were flown to New York to face federal charges. Interim leadership in Venezuela was assumed by Delcy Rodriguez, while the U.S. indicated temporary oversight of certain government functions. This operation marked the first time in modern history that the United States captured a sitting foreign head of state on accusations of drug trafficking and narcoterrorism. Maduro will appear before a U.S. federal court in Manhattan to face multiple charges: conspiracy to import cocaine into the United States, narcoterrorism, money laundering, weapons violations. If convicted, he could face decades in prison. This represents both a legal judgment and a symbolic conclusion to decades of mismanagement. Even without handcuffs, the Venezuelan economy had already judged Maduro. Empty supermarkets and abandoned hospitals testified to decades of misrule. Hyperinflation wiped out personal savings. Millions of citizens fled the country. The U.S. operation made the symbolic verdict concrete and unavoidable. Empires fall when their economies break. Governments fall when institutions fail. Leaders fall when reality catches up. Venezuela's economy did more than collapse, it testified. And for Nicolás Maduro, his fate may become a cautionary tale for generations. Economic mismanagement cannot be hidden forever. Institutions matter more than loyalty. Even the strongest rulers cannot survive when their nation itself rebels through scarcity and dysfunction.